All right, we're going to get started with a pretty big topic that applies to Shabbat, and that is the topic of cooking and heating food and so on and so forth. It's a big topic. It's very practical because we deal with cooking and eating and so on. I mean, that's a big part of what we do on Shabbat, and what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do is important to know and to understand. And it's as I said, a big area in the halakha. So we're going to spend, maybe the better part of the week talking about the various different cases that apply and how we deal with it, at least 3 days. I don't see us finishing in less than 3 days. So we'll start with the beginning. Hamivashel b'Shabbat b'mezid asur lo le'olam u'le'acherim mutar b'motzei Shabbat miyad b'shogeg asur bo bayom gam le'acherim v'la'erev mutar gam lo miyad. So actually, this area of halakha, the rabbis were very sensitive to the possibility that people would play games and people would not deal so straight, and therefore they actually, in addition to saying what's not allowed and allowed and not allowed, they also have rules that are kind of like penalties and punishments for things, as you're going to see. So let's say I cooked something on Shabbat, right? I cooked a loaf of bread, right? I baked a loaf of bread. So I am never allowed, if I knew that I was baking a loaf of bread and I was trying to, I knew what I was doing, I knew it was forbidden, I may never eat that loaf of bread. That loaf of bread is off limits to me, not only on Shabbat, but even after Shabbat. So interesting thing. And for other people, not only for me, even for other people, that loaf of bread is forbidden on that Shabbat. It's allowed after the Shabbat, but not on the Shabbat. Again, so to be clear, I baked a loaf of bread. I knew I wasn't allowed to bake a loaf of bread because it's forbidden to do on Shabbat. But I am now punished in the sense that I am never allowed to eat that bread. That bread, in addition to me making the sin that I cooked on Shabbat, if I were to eat that bread, I have another sin, which is that I ate something I was not allowed to eat, right? So that would be for me. Now, what if I baked it, right, for me? Does that mean so the bread can never be eaten? So other people can eat it after Shabbat, not on Shabbat, but after Shabbat. So the punishment remains, the off limits remains even for other people, that whole Shabbat. Now, what if I made a mistake? What if I didn't know it was forbidden to cook? Or I didn't know it was Shabbat? Or I didn't know there was a fire there or something like that? And it's really more, I didn't know it was forbidden. I didn't know it was Shabbat. I can't have it on Shabbat, but I could have it after Shabbat. And other people can have it right away, right? They can have it even that day. So it's a question as to whether or not I was made this mistake b'mezid, right, on purpose, or b'shogeg, by mistake. If I make it by mistake, so I could have it, but not till after Shabbat, and other people can have it now. But if I did it on purpose, I could never have it, and other people can't have it until after Shabbat. Okay, so that's just it's a particular kind of halakha that applies specifically to cooking food on Shabbat. Whether or not it extends to other things, we could talk about it at a different time. But it's specific. It's an area of halakha called ma'aseh Shabbat, which means you made something on Shabbat. But it's generally applied specifically to cooking. If I cooked something on Shabbat, it becomes off limits. Not only I'm not allowed to do it, the item is kind of like a preventative deterrent, so that we won't do it. And you can't even have it, even if you did it. Okay? Good? Good. Okay. So now we're going to get into what is actually forbidden. So there's a lot of things that fit under the category of what's forbidden. Ha'ofeh pat b'Shabbat. Right? So number one would be to bake bread. Right? If you bake bread on Shabbat, how do you bake something? You take dough, right, and you put it into some kind of oven or on a stove or over a flame. Right, all those things would bake it. Forbidden. Or mevashel ma'achal, or you boil or some version of food, right? So what does that mean? You boil the food. You take the food and you either put it into a pot of boiling water, or you take food and you put it in the oven, or we're going to see other things. Or martiach mayim o chalav, or if you boil a liquid such as water or milk, right? If you take that and you make it, you heat that up, right? That would be mivashel. All those are mivashel. V'chen, and so too, hatzolah basar al gabe gechalim chayav mishum mivashel. So too, someone that roasts or grills something over a fire, mivashel. So too, someone that fries something, right? You take oil, you heat it up. It's already, once you heat it up to oil, it's a problem. But if you take something and put it in the oil so that it fries, that would also be a problem. So all these types of things, baking, boiling, cooking, grilling, roasting, frying, all those things are all the same sin. They're all the sin of cooking on Shabbat. We call it mivashel, baking, cooking, or ofer, baking. They're all the same melacha. Now here's an interesting thing that you might not have considered.
There's some interference. Is it possible to the microphone's on a mute? There's
yeah, I'm going to unmute everyone, and if anyone wants to ask, so just so that's number one. Okay, now וכן הממיש שעווה או חלב או זפת וכיוצא בהם חייב משום מבשל. But it's not only food, right? If you take a wax or animal fat, which they used for candles and things like that, or oils or something like that, and you take them and you heat them, and as a result of them, they go from being either a solid or some congealed type of matter, and now it liquefies, that's also a problem, right? If I heat up a piece of metal, right, and I heat up that metal in order to bend it or do something to it, I have also committed the sin of mivashel. So we have to be careful about these types of things. Now here's another aspect of the melacha that's important to realize is, and this doesn't always apply to certain areas of halacha, but it does on Shabbat, which is, let's say the food didn't need to be cooked, right? Let's say it was very edible as it was, raw, right? What are examples of things like that? Fruits, vegetables, right? You know, you don't need to cook an apple to eat it, right? You don't need to cook a carrot to eat it. So perhaps when I cook that item, I'm not really doing a melacha because I'm not substantially changing the item. Whereas that applies in some areas of halacha, it doesn't apply for cooking on Shabbat. If you bake an apple, you bake a carrot, you cook a carrot, or whatever it may be, asur, you're not allowed to do that. And all that comes under the melacha as well. So it doesn't matter if the food is edible raw or not. Once you cook it, problem, no good. Okay. Now, next item. And the mlechet bishul kesher im mlechet havara. Says you have to be careful. People don't realize that these two laws, which seem to be related, are actually not. It says one is havara. Havara means lighting a fire. Right, lighting a fire is one melacha. It says, and bishul, cooking, is another melacha. And whereas you could see some relationship, they are actually two separate halachot, two separate melachot. One is about lighting a fire, and one is about cooking. And you could do one without the other, and the other without the one. Right? You know. So he gives examples. He says, let's say, for example, right, the fire was lit from before Shabbat, right? If you lit the fire before Shabbat, you might think to say, oh, I didn't do the melacha, the fire was on from before, right? Irrelevant. He says also, if you add water to a boiling pot, right? It's already boiling from before. That's a sin for cooking, even if it's not a sin for lighting a fire. But he says many people make this mistake. And we have to instruct people and educate people that these are two separate things. They're both problematic, and they're problematic individually as well. So even if I have a pre-existing fire, cooking is still forbidden. So it's not dependent on whether or not I lit the fire on Shabbat, which is another area, which of course I can't do. Okay. Question?
Does this apply to heating or when you say cooking? If
So
something
the next topic is what you're going to call heating. We're going to get to it in plenty of time today. It's the halacha after this one. Give me one more minute. So he says now, there's another aspect of the halacha that is interesting. Is most of the time when we talk about cooking, we're talking about cooking that gets done how? Through some version of a fire, right? What do I mean some version of a fire? Either you actually have some flame, whether it's created via coals or wood or gas or electric, right? I don't know how electric really creates a fire, but we'll call the electric fire, right? That's one way to cook, right? And that's the way most of us cook, right? You know, if you think about what's in your kitchens or in industrial kitchens, right? They're using gas, coals, wood, or some electric, something, you know, some electricity heating something else that creates a tremendous amount of heat that allows it to cook, right? It's all that kind of heat, right? It's using heat to change the foods and to be a different state, right? You know, it becomes different. That's the basis of what cooking is. So, but what if there's other ways to do this? What if I heat something through a fire, right? And now I get rid of the fire, right? The fire is out, right? So let's say I take a piece of metal, right, and I heat it to a very high temperature. Or I take you know, they have even some versions of like cloth that could be heated very hot, maybe electrically or not, and then you take it off the heater, but they retain their heat. So this is forbidden as well. You can't, not only can you not use the fire directly, you can't use something that's called tolada ta'or. Tolada means a byproduct of the fire, right? You can't use a byproduct of the fire, something that was heated up, and use that to cook. You can't do that either, right? And so that's an area of halacha that's interesting, which is if you had something heated by a fire, you can't use that either to warm the food, to cook the food. So too, the sun, right? Let's say I have a black scarf, right? And I set it out in the sun for a couple of hours, right? What's going to happen to that black scarf? It's going to be really, really hot, right? So now, can I take that black scarf and which is really hot, and wrap something in it? And by wrapping something in it, right, an egg or something like that, I might actually be able to cook it in some way. And in fact, in the time of the Gemara, this was the way that they cooked certain things. So I'm not allowed to do that either, because they didn't want you using that scarf on the fire, so you can't use it in the sun either. But you can cook in the sun directly, right? Meaning if the sun would cook something directly, meaning if by leaving it out in the sun itself, not the things around it, the sun itself would cook that item, then that would be okay. So you're not allowed to use fire. You're not allowed to use the byproduct of fire. You're not allowed to use the byproduct of sun, but you can use the sun itself to cook. I don't know that any of us would ever do that. It's more of a theoretical conversation than anything else. But that is the halacha, and that's where it goes. Yeah, any questions until now? Great. So now I want to get to the area that is the most common and most practical, and that's the question that Avi asked, which is, what about heating something, right? Very often what we do is we'll cook something on a Thursday or Friday, and it'll be cooked. And now on Shabbat morning, let's say, what will we want to do? It's already cooked, it's in my fridge or in my freezer. Can I take it out of the fridge or freezer where it's cold and put it on a stove in an oven or something like that to reheat it, right? So that's the question that we have. So he says like this, Tavshil shenit bashel kol tzorcho v'nitztanen. If I have a cooked dish that was already cooked all the way, right? Meaning it's already ready to be eaten. And now it got cold, either because I just let it sit, or I put it in a refrigeration unit. It says if you go back and heat it up on Shabbat to the level that it gets hot enough. And what's the level of hot? So it's an interesting concept. It's a concept of the hand would burn on it, right? And there's all sorts of different ways of figuring what level of heat that is. But let's say it's about 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Haya mishum mivashel. He says, if you do that, you have cooked, right? So something's in my fridge. I take it and put it on the fire. I have cooked according to this. But there's a big debate on this as to, does this apply to all foods or not? According to Sephardim, this only applies if the food has some liquid in it. If the food is liquidy, then you can't do this. So let's say I have a soup or a hamid or a broth or something like that. I cooked it on Thursday, and now I want to eat it for lunch on Shabbat. I can't put that on the fire. You're not allowed to heat up a liquid, to reheat a liquid, right? So not allowed.
Rabbi, you're not allowed to heat it to the point where it would burn your hand.
Correct.
Correct.
Right. So if it's less, so what is that level? That level is 110 degrees, which is pretty much. It's actually not burn your hand. The Chachamim explain that's the term of what it means, but they actually say that it would hurt a baby if you put it on the baby's belly. Right. So it's a much lower level than whether or not I would, have to go to the hospital because I burnt my hand. So it's about 110, 115 degrees Fahrenheit, which that's not a very high temperature. Especially when you consider body, room temperature is 70, body heat's 98. So 110, 115 is not very hot. So to reheat a soup is basically forbidden. You're not allowed to do it. For Ashkenazim, it's not only liquid, also solid. But Sephardim, you're allowed to reheat a solid. So if I have bread, right? Bread I cooked beforehand, right? And now it was in the fridge, so it got cold, and I want it to get a little warmer, right? I don't want it to be so cold. I will not be violating bishul. I am not violating cooking by putting it on the fire. Now we're going to see it's not so simple that I could just put it on the fire. But the point is, it's not violating cooking. That's the first thing that we need to get across, and we're going to build on this idea. But the first thing is, there's a big difference between liquids and solids when it comes to reheating. Reheating, not cooking, right? Cooking, not allowed. But reheating, right, it's allowed. So let's take a piece of meat, right? If I have a raw piece of meat, it's not cooked. So I can't put it on the fire, because when I put it on the fire, right, then I'm cooking it. I'm gonna, it's barbecue, right? But if I barbecued on Wednesday, and then I had it left over, and I put it in the fridge, and now on Shabbat I take out that steak and I say, let me reheat that. It's already cooked, and I want to put it on the fire. I'm not, since it's solid, I'm not violating the concept of bishul, cooking. Now we're going to see there's more to it than that. So it's not actually allowed. But I'm not violating cooking by doing that. And so since it's cooking that I don't have to worry about, there might be other issues that I have to worry about, but I could deal with those issues. Whereas cooking, you can't cook. So give me a little bit more time. Now, he says, so therefore, if you have a dish that was cooked and some kind of food that was cooked and it was in the refrigerator from before Shabbat, you could actually take the food and put it on what we call a hot plate or a blech on Shabbat, even on a heat level that's higher. That's a blech, something on a gas fire. Provided it's all dry. It's not a liquidy food. It says, and even if it has a little bit of liquid in it, as long as the majority was not liquidy, then you're allowed to put it on Shabbat, right? So in other words, let's say, sometimes you might have a mechshi, right? So the mechshi, it's solid, but sometimes there's liquid in it, right? That's okay. So what can I do? I can't put it on directly on a fire on Shabbat. But what I can do is I could put it on, and the reason behind this, and we'll get to it at another point in time, but I want to make sure I say this today. The reason is, not only are we concerned about cooking, which we said we're not concerned about cooking with this type of food because it's already cooked and you're just reheating it, but there is a concern that I might play with the fire in some way, shape, or form, to stoke the coals or to turn the knob up or down or raise or lower, and that would be burning, which we said we're not allowed to do. So in order to avoid doing that, the Chachamim said you can only do this on an item that is either no setting that raises and lowers, and that's why a lot of the hot plates, there's no setting. It's either plugged in, it's either on or off. So you can't raise it or lower it, so you're not worried. It's on from before Shabbat, no problem. Or there's some message that it sends to you, don't touch the fire. And that's what the blech comes and does, right? The blech is a metal plate that you place over a flame, right? By putting a metal plate over the flame, when you put something on there, you see, it's Shabbat. Don't touch the fire. Don't raise or lower it. And therefore it becomes allowed. That's why some people say not only should you put the blech on top of the fire, but if you can either remove the buttons from the oven or cover the buttons from the oven so that you won't touch them to raise them and lower them, you should do that as well. So that's another aspect of what we have when it comes to cooking on Shabbat. And this is very, very important and very practical in how we do things. So again, I can't cook something new on Shabbat. So if it has not been cooked before, if it's a raw item, I can't cook it on Shabbat. Meaning I can't take it from wherever it is and put it on a fire, even if that fire is covered. However, if it was been cooked before Shabbat and it's more solid than liquid, if it's more liquid than solid, I can't reheat it even. But if it's more solid than liquid, then I can reheat it if I'm putting it on a hot plate, which can't be adjusted. They also have some like warming drawers that are the same thing. There's no adjustment to them. Or I've covered the fire, which gives me a symbol that says don't touch the fire. Or I've covered the buttons, which would allow me to adjust the fire. All those things would allow me to reheat something. So that's very practical and very, very important.
So Rabbi, in essence, you're saying there's no difference between removing the knobs from an oven and putting a hot plate on, or something, a metal cover or anything. It's just a sign. Is that accurate?
Pretty much accurate. The only thing that I would say maybe makes it a little less accurate is the more prevailing practice is to cover the flame itself. And so perhaps because it's the more prevailing practice, it has a little extra power to it. Meaning if it's what my neighbor and his neighbor and his neighbor and his neighbor and my grandparents did, so then that adds a little more power to it. But from the strict letter of the law, it really pretty much does what you need to do. So if for whatever reason a blech doesn't work for you, but covering the fire or removing the buttons is more feasible for some reason or another, or you're in a situation where you traveled somewhere and you don't have a blech, right? But this you would be able to do. So yes, that would make a difference, and it would be okay.
All right, two things. The metal that you put over this, it was fine. That's fine. That's considered a blech. I know that.
Yes, the metal. That's what a blech is. A blech is not it's just a sheet of metal. Or an empty pot. You could take an empty pot and put the empty pot, and then it's a pot on top of a pot. It's something that shows it serves the purpose of covering the fire in order to show, don't play with the thing. It's Shabbat.
And then I think I recall in a previous class you can't heat up the challah. Is that true?
You can under this. Yeah.
On the blech? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, on a blech.
Rabbi, what about
if from scratch? But you can.
About if the food is mainly congealed, but it's going to turn into a liquid, so it's solid when it comes out of the
So that's actually the next halacha, which I didn't get to today. So I could say come back tomorrow, but basically it's going to be allowed. It's going to be allowed to do that.
So what you're saying is you cannot reheat hamid. Correct.
Not reheating. So on Shabbat morning, you should not be putting the hamid on the thing. Even, and I want to get back to the congealed later, right? You might say, hamid is it froze, right? So now that's different. I'm talking about something that in its normal state is congealed. That is where it's going to be allowed. But we're going to get more to it tomorrow. I wanted to give a quick answer, but frozen hamid would be a problem. So,
even majority was vegetables and everything. Majority.
Hamid, I guess there's some hamid that's like that, but hamid is really, it's not majority. Hamid is majority. Any hamid I've ever had is majority liquid. It's more for like the mechshi or the, I don't know. There's lots of other things that, like spaghetti with meatballs, so there's some liquid there, but it's spaghetti. It's not,
Rabbi, so cholent is okay?
No, cholent is not. Cholent has to be on from before Shabbat. We're going to get to cholent. But if cholent was cold and now it's reheated, I mean, again, it depends on how, we'll get to cholent. But to make cholent, which usually you have to add a lot of water and it goes from before Shabbat, it has to be from before Shabbat. If it's a solid or mostly solid, then I guess it would be okay. But whatever, we'd have to discuss what each cholent would be. Anyway, let's stop here for today. We're already a little bit over, and we'll pick up tomorrow. Like I said, a lot of stuff.
Great day, everybody.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Take care.
Thank you.